So it was December of 2023, about 9 o'clock on a Wednesday night, and I was sitting on my couch trying to figure out how to register a youth soccer team to join the indoor season at E-Line for the winter. And I'd been putting it off for a couple of days. It had come down to the wire because I only had a few more days to the deadline, and I had to do it. And the reason I was doing it was because I was the manager for the team that season. And the reason that I was the manager for the team that season was because my wife signed up to be the manager for the team that season. Now, I'm not throwing her under the bus or anything. The reason she signed up to be the manager was because the year before, either there was no team manager or they didn't do a very good job, the coach wasn't supported, communication wasn't all that great, there were no snacks at the end of the game, and that's kind of like the big thing for kids, like, we get a snack after the game. And so, and there was no indoor season because nobody coordinated it. And so she said, hey, I'm going to do that for the team this year. And then I said, hey, you're already coaching volleyball this year, and you told me last year at the end of the season, don't let you coach volleyball, but yet you're doing it again, so why don't I step in and be the manager? And she's like, okay, that'd be great. So I'm trying to figure out how to register the team. I finally registered the team, and then I realized once the team is registered, each family has to individually register each player. It's not like I can put a roster down, which means then I have to go and contact all the parents and give them instructions on how to register and then collect all the money. I'm like, and you've got 2 days to do it before the deadline hits, so you've got to get it done. So every night for the next 2 nights, I'm just like at the computer at 9:30 at night on the couch trying to get this thing registered. And needless to say, my attitude in that moment was not the best. Truthfully, my attitude for most of the duties that I had in being the manager wasn't the greatest all season. Anytime I had to pay the refs, anytime I had to go get equipment, anytime I had to help get practice started because the coach was going to be late, I didn't have the best attitude. And I wonder if anybody else has been in a situation where you've been there as well. Maybe it has been with youth sports. Maybe you got suckered into coaching a team because nobody else would do it, and you're like, I don't know the first thing about coaching. Maybe it's being a room parent. You're like, I know these teachers need support, but it's the last thing I want to do, but yet you do it anyway. Maybe it's a work committee, your homeowners association, or maybe even here at church. You get an email from me, and you're like, what is he going to ask me to do this time, right? We all have these moments where we know, especially as followers of Jesus, that we know that we should serve, but sometimes our attitude when it comes to serving isn't the best. Sometimes our attitude with serving is that it's more of an obligation, it's more of a duty, and there isn't a whole lot of joy in the midst of it. So over the course of the summer, we've been going through this Summer of Formation reading plan, and this sermon series is accompanying that, trying to help us have imagination about what it means to be formed and what practices we can engage with in order to experience formation. And we're starting in another week or so on the last stretch of practices that are all about going, giving, being outward focused. And so this morning we're going to look at this idea of serving and specifically how serving forms us. And the question I want to ask you is, what does it take? What does it take for our attitude in serving to go from being duty to desire? How do we move from an attitude of duty, I have to do this, to desire, I get to, or I want to do this with serving? And so where we're going to start is looking at what internally is going on in our own heart that sometimes blocks us and prevents us from serving. And we're going to look at 3 different passages this morning. So if you have a Bible with you, get ready to jump. We're going to be in Mark 10. We're going to be in 1 Corinthians 12. And then we're going to be in Philippians 2. So get ready to jump between those 3 passages. And we're going to start in Mark 10, looking at the struggle of our own heart for why sometimes we don't want to serve. So this is what we read. This is in Mark 10. The context is Jesus is on his way to Jerusalem. He's traveling to Jerusalem with the disciples. They're on their way for the Passover festival to celebrate in Jerusalem. And James and John, two of Jesus' disciples, come to him with a very specific request. This is what they come and ask Jesus. This is Mark 10, verse 35. James and John, the sons of Zebedee, came to him, being Jesus, and said, "Teacher, we want you to do for us whatever we ask." Right? I mean, just let that question sink in for a minute. We want you to do for us whatever we ask. I mean, talk about an audacious and outrageous and bold request. Basically, they're asking for a blank check. Jesus, we want you to do just whatever we ask. They're treating Jesus as though he's a genie in a bottle who operates on the philosophy, your wish is my command. It's as though they're like pushing Jesus not to the passenger seat, taking over the driver's seat. It's like, hey, we're going to be in the front two seats. Jesus, you get in the back of the bus. We're going to drive this thing moving forward. Now, what makes this request so crazy? I mean, it's crazy in and of itself, but what makes it even that much more crazy is what Jesus tells them right before they make this request. Again, if you were to back up a few verses to verse 32, they're on their way to Jerusalem, it says, with Jesus leading the way. And the disciples were astonished, while those who followed were afraid. Again, he took the 12 aside, and he told them what was going to happen to them. "We are going up to Jerusalem," he said, "and the Son of Man," a reference to Jesus, "will be delivered over to the chief priests and the teachers of the law. They will condemn him to death and will hand him over to the Gentiles, who will mock him and spit on him, flog him, and kill him." Like, this is what Jesus tells them. And their very next move is to come to Jesus, hey, do for us whatever we ask. Now, if I'm Jesus, I'd be like, wait, what? Did you not just hear what I just said about what's going to happen to me when we get to Jerusalem? I will be arrested, I will be flogged, I will be mocked, I will be spat upon, I will be killed. And you're coming to me and saying to me, do for you whatever you ask? Like, I don't even have words, right? If I was Jesus, I'd be like, how about this? Why don't you do whatever I tell you to do? And maybe, just maybe, I'll let you hang around and be a disciple, right? Now, if I'm one of the other 12 and I hear these guys ask this, I'd be like, oh, they're cooked, right? Like, they just know this is a dumb thing to ask. But notice how Jesus responds. Again, if I'm Jesus, that's how I'm responding. But notice how he responds, verse 36. "What do you want me to do for you?" Like, he is actually entertaining their request. What do you want me to do? Jesus, we want you to do for us whatever we ask. Okay. What do you want me to do for you? Now, I doubt that Jesus is entertaining this request because he's planning to actually grant their request. My guess is he's moving towards them in order to shepherd and teach them. So when he says, "What do you want me to do for you?" he's just playing into their game, knowing that somewhere along the way he's going to subvert their request. But he says to them, hey, what do you want me to do for you? And so they respond saying this, verse 37, "Let one of us sit at your right and the other at your left in your glory." So what they want are positions of power and prestige. They want status and significance. They want to sit on either side of Jesus so that way everybody, when they look at Jesus, they see the two of them and they think to themselves, we are pretty significant because we are sitting next to this guy. We're his right-hand men, and if you want to get to him, you have to come through us, and that's going to make us the best of all the disciples. That's what they're wanting, and essentially they want to look impressive in the eyes of others, and at some level they think that it's all about them. In a sense, they are operating on a mindset of entitlement, that Jesus should do for us whatever we ask, and we should have these seats of power and prestige. Now, sometimes, if we're honest, we operate in the same way. We might not be as bold as James and John to articulate it that way, but sometimes we do operate on the assumption that the world revolves around me. I'm at the center of it, people are here to serve me, and I'm entitled to the things that I want. And at times, this is even the message that our culture is giving to us and putting in front of us. The story of our culture is that it's all about you. We live in a consumeristic society, and in a consumeristic society, the consumer is always right. And so when we think of ourselves in that lens and in that way, we think, yeah, it's all about me. This is a magazine ad from years ago from Toyota. It's a Corolla ad, and it might be kind of hard to see on the screen, but on the top half of the ad, there's this really ornate gold frame that is framing in the interior of a Corolla, right? Probably not leather seats, probably, plush cloth seats. It's got its little stick shift, gear shifter in the middle there. Angels floating around in the background, nice ornate purple wallpaper surrounding it. But then when you go down to the bottom of the ad, you read this: on the day you purchase the all-new Corolla is the day you'll start living the dream. Being a grand fromage in high society is indeed a lot to think about. Hence, the Corolla's tranquil interior is the perfect, quiet place to contemplate your domination of the latest cotillion. This crowning achievement is the result of an acoustic noise-reducing front windshield and sound-absorbing materials designed to help keep clamor and peons out and thoughts of grandeur in, right? The title above it, a quiet place to revel in your entitlement, right? Like, Toyota, you might have swung and missed with this one, right? Because it's just a Corolla. I mean, I would drive a Corolla, don't get me wrong. I would take one, but it's just a Corolla, right? The point being, like this is the message that comes our way in the world. And when we receive that and absorb it, if that's the story our world is telling, it's really easy for us to believe, yeah, this is all about me. When I drive my Corolla through Tosa, I get to keep clamor and peons out and thoughts of grandeur in. Now, what's interesting about this story is that what Jesus, I think, is trying to do, he's trying to reshape their thinking of themselves. And for us who are here this morning, I think Jesus is doing the same thing. Because it's not just James and John who have this perspective that they should have these seats of power, that they're the greatest among all the disciples. The other disciples actually think the same thing. If you were to back up to chapter 9, there's this story. Again, they're on the road, they're traveling, they're somewhere up in Israel, traveling to Capernaum. And as they're traveling, the disciples are there with Jesus. And there's this argument. There's a heated discussion on the road as they're traveling. And Jesus, it says in the text, hears this conversation, knows that they're wrapped up in some sort of argument, and then they get to their destination, and Jesus asks them, hey, what were you guys talking about as we traveled to Capernaum? And then the text in Mark 9 says, the disciples were silent. They said nothing. They wouldn't answer because they were arguing about who was the greatest. I mean, again, like middle school boys on a basketball court trying to outdo each other with all their trick shots or whatever, and then a varsity player comes along and schools them, and they have to walk off the court hanging their head in shame. We're not as great as we think we are. Jesus just asked them one question, hey, what were you talking about on the road? And they know it's foolish to be arguing about who's the greatest. But then here comes James and John, and they ask, we want to sit at the right and the left of you in your glory. See, Jesus is trying to show and shape in them, it's not about you. Because this is what he says next, verse 42. After these two guys make this request, after the other disciples get upset with them for making the request, Jesus calls them all together. And he says this in verse 42. You know that those who are regarded as rulers over the Gentiles lord it over them, and their high officials exercise authority over them. It's like that's the story of their culture, that people in position and power lord it over those who are under them. And the disciples have been shaped by that. The disciples have seen that. The disciples are saying, we want that too. But Jesus says in verse 43, not so with you. Instead, whoever wants to become great among you must be your servant. And whoever wants to be first must be slave of all. Jesus is flipping the script on the me-centered mindset. Jesus says, yeah, you can be great. Pursue greatness all you want. But know that in my kingdom, it's not about positions of power and prestige or status and significance. It's about doing the dishes and taking out the trash. It's about organizing the party, not being the guest of honor at the party. It's doing the little tasks that nobody may ever see and nobody's going to give you praise for, but they're equally significant and godly. The way you become great in the kingdom is through service. It's not about you. It's not about me. It's all about Jesus. But interestingly enough, even Jesus says it's not about him, because he finishes this in verse 45. For even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve and give his life as a ransom for many. So if you have any interest, if you're following Jesus, if you're a follower of Jesus, and you have any interest to be formed to the likeness of Jesus, and you desire to be in a place where you actually desire serving, the first thing you do, going from duty to desire, is to see it's not about you. It's not about you. It's not about you getting what you want, getting your way, getting things on your terms. It's about you starting to view other people and to view greatness in the kingdom as something different than what our world often sees and says it is. Because when we have a me-centered mindset, when we have an overinflated view of ourselves, it's really hard to desire serving because we believe we should be served. But regularly, the New Testament shows us a different way to perceive who we are, specifically as it relates to those who are around us. So we're going to jump now to 1 Corinthians 12. And in 1 Corinthians, what Paul is addressing is crazy division in the church. I mean, that right out of the gate is his first topic that he's addressing in chapter 1. He says, some of you are dividing yourself around personalities in the church. Some are saying, I follow Paul. Some are saying, I follow Peter. Some are saying, I follow Apollos. As though to say, me attaching myself to this leader in the church is what makes me either more spiritual or more significant than those around me. And so one of Paul's goals with 1 Corinthians is to try and bring a sense of unity to the church. It's almost as though he would say that is the biggest danger in the church, is when a church is divided, it can no longer be effective. And so he's trying to bring unity in the church. And in chapter 12, he's using an example of a human body to illustrate the point. This is what he says, jumping into 1 Corinthians 12, verse 12. Just as a body, though one, has many parts, but all its many parts form one body, so it is with Christ. For we were all baptized by one Spirit, so as to form one body, whether Jews or Gentiles, slave or free, and we were all given the one Spirit to drink. Even so, the body is not made up of one part, but of many. Now, if the foot should say, because I'm not a hand, I do not belong to the body, it would not for that reason stop being a part of the body. And if the ear should say, because I'm not an eye, I do not belong to the body, it would not, for that reason, stop being a part of the body. If the whole body were an eye, where would the sense of hearing be? If the whole body were an ear, where would the sense of smell be? But in fact, God has placed the parts in the body, every one of them, just as he wanted them to be. If they were all one part, where would the body be? As it is, there are many parts, but one body. So he's saying all the different parts of a physical body have their unique function that makes life possible. And he's saying that's true of a group of people in a church as well. He says in verse 21, the eye cannot say to the hand, I do not need you. And the head cannot say to the feet, I do not need you. On the contrary, those parts of the body that seem to be weaker are indispensable. And the parts that we think are less honorable, we treat with special honor. There should be no division in the body, jumping down to verse 25, but that its parts should have equal concern for each other. If one part suffers, every part suffers with it. If one part is honored, every part rejoices with it. So in a community like this, it's really easy to think the most important person in the room is the person who stands on the platform and tells everybody else what to do. But in reality, the New Testament levels the playing field. Like, we're all on equal ground. We all are of the same position. We may have unique functions in our role, but nobody is better off than anybody else because the reality of sin in our world levels the playing field. Paul will say that in the New Testament. He will say, I'm the chief among sinners. I'm no better than anybody else. I've just been, for some reason, and only God knows why, given this unique role to serve the church in this way. And that's exactly the mindset that we should all have, that my role within the church isn't to receive from the church, but to serve the church. Now, yes, you will receive from the church. There are things that the church will do for you, the things that the church will give you. But the mindset of the New Testament is that I come into the church seeking to serve and to give before I think about what is it I'm going to get. Because how many of us, again, if we live in a consumeristic society and we're good consumers, what do? We evaluate different experiences that we have based on our preferences and whether or not our preferences were met. And so we come into the church and we do the same thing. Like, I didn't like that song, you know? We play that song every week, and it's not inspiring. It's too slow. The music's too loud. The coffee's not any good this week. It was too strong. It was too weak. My kids were held long in their class. I've got to go. The bathroom's missing toilet paper. And these are just things I say, right? These are things I say as I walk through the church, right? Like I'm not immune to this either, right? We all can come in here and evaluate our experience here as though this is a product that we consume, rather than thinking that the call of the church and the call of Jesus is to contribute to what God is doing. The second way that you move from a sense of duty to desire and serving is you realize you have something to contribute. And you may maybe hey, it's not much. I don't have much to give, but sometimes it's the little that you can give that makes a big difference. I don't know how many people here ever stop and think about your fingernails as part of your body. I probably spend 30 seconds a week thinking about my fingernails. But when I've got to scratch a price tag off something, I'm like, oh, thank the Lord for my fingernails, right? Like when I've got to open a can and not do what my kids do and go at it with their teeth, right? All the little parts of our body have a function. You probably never think about your eyelashes unless you're a lady and you do whatever ladies do to them. But eyelashes aren't just for aesthetics. Eyelashes have a function. They keep dust out of your eyes. If we didn't have eyelashes, we'd all be walking around like this all the time. Oh my gosh, I got something in my eye again, right? Every little part of the body has a very specific function. And if you don't think you have anything to contribute here, I would say you're dead wrong. You're dead wrong. We need everybody to do all the things around here. Because a Sunday morning, in general, I don't know, maybe takes close to 100 volunteers for it to happen. From all the little things of people running the tech booth, people greeting, serving coffee, helping out with kids. We need people on a regular basis to serve in a variety of capacities. And again, we're not serving for the sake of trying to create a comfy place for people like us to enjoy. We're serving for the sake of saying, how can we leverage what God is doing in our body to reach people in the world who don't know Jesus? How can we set an environment? How can we reach out to them? How can we set a context to bring people in so that they can meet Jesus and know how much he loves them? And there's all kinds of ways that you can serve. We're always in need of people in the children's ministry to help out and serve down there. And you might think, hey, I raised my kids a long time ago, and I would say, great, you might be the exact right person to help out in the kids' ministry to give a struggling parent an hour and a half off on a Sunday morning. You might think to yourself hey, I love to say hi to people, and I'm really extroverted. We could use you as a greeter, and you could help people find seats. I can't tell you how many times I sit in the back at the tech booth, and I watch new people come in the door, and they're just like, oh my gosh. What? Everybody's standing. I don't know where the empty seats are. This is my first time. I don't know what to do. And fortunately, we have greeters who help them find seats, and it's a really easy way to help new people feel comfortable in our community. There's all sorts of ways, even during the week. It's not just on Sunday. Like, we have people who come. You guys make an incredible mess of these chairs every week. Did you know that? Like, they're all over the place at the end of the service, which is understandable. They're chairs, they're not pews. But we have people who come through on Friday and straighten them up so that they're not disorganized all over the place. There's all kinds of ways that you can contribute. And I would venture to say that there are some of you, the next step of maturity in your walk is to say, what is it that I can do for the church? And how can I serve and how can I give? How can I be a part and contribute to what God is doing here? Because we will only be as strong of a church as we have the number of people contributing and participating. And you have something to contribute. And also, as you do that, it's not just that you give for the sake of giving, and it's not just you give to benefit us. The reality is, when you give, there's something you experience in the process. And that takes us to our third passage. This is Philippians chapter 2. A passage that many people know really well, one of the more famous passages of the New Testament, and it starts like this. Therefore, if any of you have any encouragement from being united with Christ, if any comfort from his love, if any common sharing in the Spirit, if any tenderness and compassion, then make my joy complete by being like-minded, having the same love, being one in spirit and of one mind. Do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. Rather, in humility, value others above yourself, not looking to your own interests, but each of you to the interests of others. Now, when we read that passage, we often think that the central emphasis of that passage is verse 3. Right? Do nothing out of selfish ambition and value others above yourself. We would think that is the emphasis. That is the point that Paul is trying to make. However, the true emphasis from a grammatical standpoint is actually verse 2. Make my joy complete. That is the only main verb. Make my joy complete is the only main verb in those four passages. When you're doing Bible translation, you always look for main verbs, imperatives, indicatives, in order to guide the meaning of a text. Supporting verbs help fill it out, but main verbs drive the meaning. This is the only main verb in those four verses. Make my joy complete, which is very similar to what Jesus said during the Last Supper with his disciples in John 15. In John 15, he says, after he has taught them all night, I have told these things so that my joy may be in you, and your joy may be complete. My command is this: love each other as I have loved you. Greater love has no one than this, than to lay one's life down for one's friends. Paul is trying to say that one of the ways you go from duty to desire with serving is by seeing and knowing you experience joy when you do. You experience great joy when you serve. And if you were to type that into a Google search, you would find study after study after study, psychology studies, Harvard Business Review studies, all sorts of experiments that people have done, TED Talks about how your joy in life increases when you're other-focused. How your joy in life increases when you're helping other people out and you're leveraging your own gifts and abilities to help those in need. It exponentially increases your happiness and joy. And so if you want more joy in your life, and I've never met anybody who doesn't, I've never met anybody who's like, I just want to be a miserable curmudgeon all the days of my life. People want joy in their life. One of the ways you do it is by putting others first. Not in order to get anything, but you will get something along the way. Stephen Colbert in 2011 gave the commencement speech at Northwestern University. That's where he graduated from. And during his commencement speech, this is what he had to say about putting other people first. He said, after I graduated from Northwestern, I moved to Chicago and did improv. Now, there are a few rules about improvisation, but one of the things that I was taught early on is that you are not the most important person in the scene. Everybody else is. And if they're the most important people in the scene, you will naturally pay attention to them and serve them. But the good news is you're in the scene too. So hopefully to them, you're the most important person, and they will serve you. No one is leading. You're all following the follower. No one is serving, or everyone is serving the servant. He says you cannot win improv. Improv isn't a game that you try and win and you come out looking the best. Rather, it's a team sport where everybody is trying to contribute. He said in life is an improvisation. You have no idea what's going to happen next, and you're mostly just making things up as you go along. And like improv, you can't win life. And this is when he was doing the Colbert Report for Comedy Central. He said, I have my own show, which is full of very talented people ready to serve me. But at my best, I'm serving them just as hard. And together we serve a common idea. And the sure sign that things are going well is that no one can really remember whose idea was whose or who gets the credit for what joke. He said, life is improv. We're all just trying to do our best to make it up as we go. But when we see that our role isn't to try and win, isn't to try and be the best or be on top, but it's to serve other people, and we live in a community where everybody has that mindset, beautiful things can and will happen. I had a seminary professor who wrote a book called The Drama of Doctrine. And in this book, he talks about improvisation. He uses an analogy of theater and a stage play and scripts and all that and playwrights to talk about our faith. And he would say in the church, we also are called to improvisation. That doesn't mean we make our theology up as we go, because in improv, people aren't just making things up as they go. They're submitting themselves to a set of rules that guide how they operate. And again, one of those rules is you put other people first. You listen intently to what they're saying, what they're doing, their needs, and you try and set them up for the punchline. You try and set them up for the laugh. And in the church, we are called to listen intently to what people are saying. We're called to listen intently to what people are doing, what they need, and to set them up in a way for success. And when I see my role is to do that for other people and to do that for the wider body, one, I experience great joy as I'm doing this with other people, and I get to see wonderful things happen in their life. And two, we get to make an impact for Christ in the world. So essentially, you could say this, that serving others shapes the joy of Jesus in you. Because the more you do that, you take on the mindset of Jesus. And this is what he says the mindset of Jesus is. In your relationships with one another, have the same mindset as Christ Jesus, who being in very nature God, did not consider equality with God something to be used to his own advantage. Rather, he made himself nothing, taking on the very nature of a servant, and being made in human likeness, and being found in appearance as a man, he humbled himself and became obedient to death on the cross. And in Hebrews 12, it says that his motivation for the cross was joy. The joy of those coming to faith and life in him. And when we see that's who I am in Jesus, that's what I'm called to. It's not about me. I have something to contribute. And by contributing, I experience great joy. It will shift our mindset from like, I have to do this, to like, man, what a privilege to serve the Lord in this way. So as we go into the last month of the summer, as we head into the fall, and as you're going to have all sorts of obligations come your way, how are you going to think about those? As we start like tap you on the shoulder, like, hey, would you mind helping out and doing this around here? How are you going to think about that? Is it going to be like, oh, I just have to do this? Or like, hey, maybe there's an opportunity here for me to grow in my faith, grow in my Christ-likeness, and reflect Jesus to the world by serving others, because it's not about me, it's about him. Now, we've said in this series that there are two ways we practice formation. There are two ways we engage in formation. One is our environment. We put ourselves in a certain environment that will form us. Two are certain practices and habits. One of the practices and habits of the church is the Lord's Supper. Because in this simple meal, we have this story of who Jesus is and what he has done. That clearly reflects Philippians chapter 2, that he emptied himself, he lowered himself, he made himself nothing, taking on the very nature of a servant to be formed like a human ultimately to be led to death. And so we go before this table, not because it's a religious ritual, but as a way to remind ourselves we are called to do the same. So as the band comes back up and as they play, we're going to dismiss you to come before the Lord's table, to take the elements as a way to remember and rehearse the story of who Jesus is and the model and the example he has set for us in putting us above himself to come and die for us.